You know, I've been in this business a long time, more than 70 years now, and I've seen a lot of smart people. I mean, really smart, the kind of people who could solve complex mathematical problems in their head, who graduated top of their class, who had every advantage you could imagine. And I've watched a good number of them fail, not because they weren't talented, they were, but because they couldn't control themselves. Now, that might sound strange to you. We live in a world that worships talent. We celebrate the genius, the prodigy, the naturally gifted, and don't get me wrong, talent matters. But I'll tell you something I've learned. Self-control beats talent almost every time when you're talking about the long run, and the long run is what matters. At least it's what should matter. I've said before that the most important quality for an investor is temperament, not intellect. You don't need to be a genius. You really don't. What you need is the ability to sit still, to do nothing when everyone around you is panicking or getting greedy, to make a decision based on logic and then stick with it even when it feels uncomfortable. That's self-control. And it's rarer than you might think. Let me tell you what I've observed over the decades. I've known plenty of people with IQs of 160 who have done remarkably poorly with money. And I've known people of more modest intelligence who have done extraordinarily well. The difference wasn't in their brain power. It was in their ability to control their impulses, their emotions, their need for immediate gratification. Think about it this way. You can have all the talent in the world, all the knowledge, all the advantages. But if you can't stop yourself from making emotional decisions, if you can't resist the temptation to follow the crowd, if you can't delay gratification, then that talent doesn't really help you much. In fact, it might even hurt you. Because smart people are often very good at justifying their bad decisions. I've seen this happen over and over again. Someone brilliant gets caught up in a mania. Everyone's making money, everyone's excited, and they convince themselves that this time is different. Their intelligence actually works against them because they can construct elaborate arguments for why their impulsive decision makes sense. But it's still an impulsive decision. It's still driven by emotion, not reason. And in the end, it leads to the same place it always does. Now, investing is really just a subset of life. And what's true in investing is true in most other areas too. The person who can control their spending, who can save consistently even when it's boring, who can stick to a plan, is going to do better than the person who earns twice as much but spends everything and then some. It's not complicated, but it requires discipline day after day, year after year. You see, talent gets you started. It opens doors. It gives you opportunities. But self-control is what allows you to walk through those doors and stay in the room. It's what prevents you from sabotaging yourself. And believe me, most people are their own worst enemy. Not the market, not the economy, not their boss or their circumstances themselves. I think about the financial crisis in 2008. I remember it well. The panic was extraordinary. People with decades of investing experience were selling everything at the worst possible time. Not because they didn't know better, they did, but they couldn't control their fear. The emotion overwhelmed the intellect. And that's when you realize that knowledge without self-control is almost useless. Or think about the opposite, the dot-com bubble at the end of the 1990s. Everyone was making money, or at least it seemed that way. People were quitting their jobs to day trade. Folks who had never invested before were convinced they'd figured it all out. And the people with real talent, with real knowledge, many of them got swept up in it too, because greed is a powerful emotion. And when everyone around you is getting rich or appears to be getting rich, it takes tremendous self-control to sit it out. I sat it out. Not because I'm smarter than everyone else, but because I had seen it before. And I knew how it would end. More importantly, I had the temperament to be comfortable being alone in my view, to be willing to look foolish for a while. That's self-control. The ability to stick to your principles even when it's uncomfortable, even when you're being criticized, even when you're missing out on what looks like easy money. Here's something else I've noticed. The periods that really test you aren't the dramatic ones. It's not the crashes or the bubbles necessarily. It's the long, boring stretches in between. It's the years when nothing much happens, when your strategy is working but slowly, when you're tempted to do something, anything, just to feel like you're making progress. That's when self-control matters most, because that's when most people give up on good strategies. Not because the strategy stopped working, but because they got impatient. They got bored. They saw someone else doing something more exciting and they wanted to chase it. The ability to be patient, to stick with something that's working even when it's not exciting, that's a rare quality. And it's more valuable than brilliance. I'll give you a simple example. Compounding. Everyone knows about compounding. It's not a secret. Einstein supposedly called it the eighth wonder of the world. But knowing about compounding and having the self-control to actually let it work are two very different things. Because compounding is slow at first. It's boring. You put money away and it grows a little, then a little more. For years and years, it doesn't feel like much is happening. And that's where most people fail. They know they should leave it alone, but they can't. They need to see faster results. They need to feel like they're doing something. The people who get rich slowly, who build real wealth over decades, they're not necessarily the smartest people. They're the ones who could control themselves, who could watch their money grow slowly without touching it, who could avoid the temptations that destroyed their smarter, more talented peers. That's the reality of it. Now, let's talk about lifestyle for a moment, because this is where you really see the difference between talent and self-control. I've known many people who made a lot of money. I mean, a lot, through talent, through luck, through being in the right place at the right time. And I've watched them lose it all. Not through bad investments necessarily, but through lifestyle inflation, through the inability to control their spending. You make a little more money, you spend a little more, and then you make more and you spend more. The house gets bigger, the car gets fancier, the vacations get more extravagant, and pretty soon you're on a treadmill. You're making more money than you ever dreamed of, but you're not getting ahead because you're spending it all. And the really insidious thing is that once you inflate your lifestyle, it's very hard to deflate it. You get used to a certain level of comfort, a certain level of luxury. And that's when you become vulnerable. I've lived in the same house for decades. I know that surprises some people. They think, well, Buffett, he could afford any house in the world. And that's true, but I like my house. It's comfortable. It's more than I need. Why would I want something bigger? What would that do for me? The answer is nothing. It would do nothing for me. But it would require more money, more maintenance, more worry. That's not intelligence. That's just self-control. The ability to resist social pressure, to resist the urge to show off, to be content with what you have even when you could have more. Most people don't fail because they don't earn enough. They fail because they can't control their spending. And that's true at every income level. I've seen people making $50,000 a year who save and build wealth. And I've seen people making $500,000 a year who are living paycheck to paycheck. The difference is self-control. Always self-control. Here's another thing. In investing, in business, in life, you're going to make mistakes. Everyone does. The question is whether you can learn from them or whether you'll keep making the same mistakes over and over. And that's a question of self-control too. Because learning from mistakes often means admitting you were wrong. It means changing your behavior. It means overcoming your ego, your pride, your need to be right. That takes discipline. That takes self-awareness. That takes control over your emotions. I've made plenty of mistakes, big ones. And when I look back at them, very few were because I didn't understand something intellectually. Most were because I let emotion override judgment. I acted too quickly. I got too enthusiastic about something. I didn't want to admit I was wrong, so I held on too long. Those are failures of temperament, not intelligence. And I had to learn to control those impulses. It took time. It's still something I work on. The thing about self-control is that it's not glamorous. Nobody makes movies about the person who patiently saved for 30 years. Nobody writes books about the investor who did nothing while everyone else was trading frantically. We celebrate action. We celebrate boldness. We celebrate genius. But the quiet discipline of self-control, that doesn't get much attention, even though it's what actually produces results. I think about the people I've worked with over the years, the ones who succeeded long-term, who built something lasting. They weren't necessarily the most talented. They were the most reliable, the ones who showed up every day, the ones who could control their emotions during tough times, the ones who didn't need constant excitement or validation. They just did the work consistently, patiently, for decades. that consistency is a form of self-control. It's the ability to do what needs to be done even when you don't feel like it, even when it's boring, even when it's hard, even when nobody's watching. That's where real success comes from, not from moments of brilliance, but from years of disciplined effort. And here's what's interesting. Self-control is a skill. It's not something you're born with or without. You can develop it. You can practice it. You can get better at it. But it requires you to actually work on it, to be aware of your impulses and your emotions, to pause before you act, to think about the long-term consequences of your decisions, not just the short-term feelings. I've seen people transform themselves through developing self-control. People who were impulsive and emotional early in their careers who learned to be patient and disciplined. It's possible, but it requires you to recognize that this is something you need to work on. And most people don't. They assume that if they just get smarter, if they just learn more, if they just find the right strategy, then everything will work out. But knowledge without self-control is like a car without brakes. You might go fast, but you're probably going to crash. Let me tell you something else. The world is designed to make self-control difficult. Everything around you is trying to get you to act immediately, to buy now, to sell now, to click here, to feel this emotion right now and act on it. The financial media is constantly creating urgency. Always a crisis, always an opportunity, always something you need to do immediately. But good decisions usually don't need to be made immediately. They need to be made carefully. And that requires you to resist all that noise, to turn it off, to be comfortable thinking for yourself in silence. This is harder now than it used to be. When I started out, information moved slowly. You had time to think. Now everything is instant. And that creates pressure, pressure to act, pressure to react, pressure to do something. But the principles haven't changed. Patience still works, discipline still works, self-control still works. Maybe even more than it used to because fewer people practice it. I've always believed that in investing, you only need to do a few things right. You don't need to make 1,000 good decisions. You need to make a handful of good decisions and avoid making a lot of bad ones. And avoiding bad decisions is almost entirely about self-control. It's about not acting when you're emotional, not acting when you don't understand something, not acting just because everyone else is acting. That sounds simple, but it's not easy because it requires you to fight against very powerful urges. The urge to do something when you're scared, the urge to follow the crowd, the urge to get rich quickly, the urge to be right, the urge to look smart. All of these urges lead to bad decisions. And the only way to overcome them is through self-control, through the discipline to pause, to think, to wait, to be willing to look foolish or to miss out in the short run in order to do well in the long run. I think about retirement, about the people who have enough and the people who don't. And again, it's not really about how much they earned. I know people who earned modest salaries their whole lives and retired comfortably. And I know people who earned enormous salaries and have nothing. The difference was what they did with the money. Could they control their spending? Could they save consistently? Could they resist the temptation to try to get rich quick? Could they stick to a simple plan for decades? That's all self-control. Or think about debt. Debt is often a failure of self-control. Not always, but often. It's wanting something now that you can't afford. It's being unwilling to wait. It's prioritizing immediate gratification over future security. And once you're in debt, it's incredibly hard to get out because now you're paying interest, which means you're working for the past instead of the future. I've avoided debt my entire life, not because I'm smart, because I don't like the feeling of owing money. That's self-control. It's choosing what's right over what's easy or what's fun right now. Here's something I want you to understand. I'm not saying talent doesn't matter. It does. If you have talent, that's wonderful. Use it. But understand that talent alone is not enough. Not even close. The graveyards are full of talented people who couldn't control themselves, who let their emotions rule them, who made one impulsive decision too many. Talent might give you an advantage, but self-control determines whether you can keep that advantage. And self-control isn't just about money. It's about how you treat people, how you handle success, how you handle failure, whether you can admit when you're wrong, whether you can keep going when things are hard, whether you can avoid becoming arrogant or complacent. all of these things require discipline. They require you to master yourself before you can master anything else. I've lived a long time now. I've seen a lot. And if there's one lesson that stands out above all the others, it's this. The ability to control yourself, your emotions, your impulses, your behavior, that's the real key to success. Not intelligence, not talent, not luck. Those things help, but they're not enough. The people who succeed long-term are the people who can delay gratification, who can be patient, who can stick to their principles even when it's hard, who can resist temptation, who can learn from mistakes instead of repeating them. That's what beats talent every single time in the long run. So if you're young, if you're just starting out, my advice is simple. Work on your self-control, practice it, get better at it, learn to be patient, learn to be disciplined, learn to control your emotions instead of letting them control you. Because if you can do that, if you can really master that, then you'll do fine. You don't need to be the smartest person in the room. You just need to be the most disciplined, the most patient, the one who can control themselves when everyone else is losing their heads. That's the real secret. And it's not really a secret at all. It's just that most people don't want to hear it because it's not exciting. It's not quick. It doesn't promise instant results, but it works. Over decades, it works. And the end, that's all that matters. Think about it.